The Trouble with Old Steam Locomotives, Part 15, Repairing the Buffer Stocks. 2 of the buffers were okay and 2 were broken. And now I have the job of repairing the 2 broken ones and try and make them look as much as possible like the ones that aren't broken. The first thing to do is to have a look at the buffer stocks and assess the situation. Construction is really weird. There's like a spacer in between the cone part and the square plate that fastens to the buffer beam. And because one buffer on the front is broken and the other buffer is the one on the back, I can't just remachine the buffer stocks to get rid of these bad spacers. This is the way I decided to do it. I bolted the metal plate to the buffer stock. With this buffer stock, the spacer is still firmly attached to the buffer stock itself. As a temporary measure, I bolted the buffer stock to the square metal plate and then put it in the machine vise in the drilling machine, and I drilled 4 holes. Initially I was going to use 4 BA bolts, so I drilled the holes 1/8 of an inch in diameter. And I thought, well, maybe 4 BA is not going to be strong enough, so I went up to 2 BA, and the tapping size for 2 BA is 5/32 of an inch. So I had to further enlarge the holes that you see here. In this clip I'm tapping one of the holes, and I found the metal plate to be really hard, but once the tap got through the metal plate, the metal underneath in the buffer stock itself was much softer. And now it's JB Weld time. I'm going to stick all these parts back together with JB Weld, followed by screwing 2 BA bolts into the 4 holes. In this clip I'm applying some JB Weld to the metal plate. I've mixed it thoroughly and I need it to go everywhere and run into all the holes and the crevices, so when the parts are bolted together it should be quite a strong joint. As I was doing this job I realised that 4 bolts is so totally over the top for this job, but nevertheless I drilled 4 holes and threaded 4 holes, so I fitted 4 bolts. I remembered that I had some 2 BA bolts that weren't very good looking on the top, but they were totally ideal for this job because I'm going to remove the top of the bolts anyway. To be honest, I made a bit of a mess of this part of the job. I drilled and threaded the holes too deep, so by the time I tightened the bolts there was no gap between the heads, or very little gap between the heads and the metal plate. What I had to do was clamp the buffer stock in my new chuck and turn away the heads, and this ended up blunting the carbide tip tool, so I finished the job off on the linisher. This is what the back of the buffer stock looks like now. It's almost an invisible repair. Well, apart from the ring where the cutting tool in the lathe dug in a bit. I decided to apply some Loctite 603 to the nuts, because even though they are nylock nuts, they're not really making much of a purchase on the bolt and remain slack. Now it's time to fill all the gaps around the buffer stock using JB Weld, and after 24 hours when the JB Weld is fully cured I will sand it down. But what I'm doing first of all is wiping some of it off with a cloth. The more I wipe off with the cloth, the less I have to sand off. Here's a good tip: always have some of these in your workshop. As you can see, these are notice board pins. Very small, easy to put in a box and easy to find. Dressmakers' pins generally get lost. Small pins are quite useful in this size for various jobs. Here for instance I'm using one to clear the swarf out of the hole in the socket bolt that holds the tip in place. I have a special tool to slacken off and tighten these bolts that came with the set. I think it's playtime, watch this. That's enough of that, back to the job. The engine's starting to run a lot better. My piston that I made and fitted is running in quite nicely. But the valve events are nowhere near what they should be. More about that in a future episode. I only drilled 2 holes in this buffer stock because, as I said earlier, 4 was so over the top. I'm taking great pains not to snap the tap. Thankfully the tapping operation was successful, no problems at all. I screwed in 2 bolts as previously shown, and then I sawed them off in the bandsaw, followed by using the linisher to make them perfectly flat. After 24 hours the JB Weld was fully cured, so I put the buffer stocks in the main vise in the workshop and used some emery cloth to just clean them up. To To remove the paint from the original buffer stocks, I used a blowtorch. So now, as well as cleaning up the JB weld, I'm also cleaning the steel where it was oxidised by the blowtorch. Nothing spectacular here, I just keep rotating the part and constantly going at it with a piece of emery cloth, first with one buffer stock and then the other one. I need to get everything back as near as possible to bare metal and leave a good keyed finish for the paint. And talking about paint, here it is. This is grey etching primer. I'm giving the bodies of the buffer stocks a good coat of etching primer, both of them. I'm not going to spray these, I'm going to brush paint them, and I'm going to attempt to brush paint them badly to make them match the other buffers. More about that in a future episode. To finish this episode, here's a gratuitous shot of the paint drying. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website. Click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you will find it very easy to find other videos that you may like to watch.